doing a little backwards. And Perek Ches, again, very relevant for Ben Torah, is called B'darchei Halimud, the derech of learning Torah properly, V'inyanei Lishma, and the meaning of learning Torah Lishma, U'pnimiyas HaTorah, and the importance of the inner dimension of Torah that we would call Nistor or Kabbalah. Last time we just looked at Sif Aleph, and Sif Aleph talks about the importance of finding again, it's not really a chiddush of the Gra, but the Gra emphasizes it. It's really from the Gemara itself, that you have to have a limud that's mashali b'chafetz, that really gives you a geschmack. And the Gra does not mean that that's all you learn. If the only thing you learn are the things that you enjoy, right? So Baruch Hashem, you learn, that's good, but there's going to be a lot of Torah that you may not necessarily enjoy. But he says that this is a yesod for enthusiasm. When you have something that you really, really love, so that gives you a geschmack. Once you have a geschmack, the geschmack is transferable to everything. They say, again, you don't know if these stories are true, that if a person wanted to be a Talmud of the Gra, now the Gra didn't have a regular yeshiva. I mean, the Gra's Talmidim were all muflagim b'chachma. I mean, Rav Chaim Volozhiner was already the Rav of Volozhin when he met the Vilna Gaon. And in fact, it's interesting that he had a job. Volozhin is not next to Vilna. Volozhin is, I don't know how much, but it's like, let's say it's 50 miles away, something like that. So he only saw the Gra a few times a year, meaning he did not see the Gra on a daily basis. So I think what used to be was he would come every 3 months for a week. He would like have 100, all the kashas that he would have, and he would come like for a week and have them answered, and then he would go back. So that's why they taina, the sefer of the minhagim of the Gra, the halacha, is a very important work. It's not the Even Shelaima, it's called the Ma'aser Rav. The Ma'aser Rav is the compendium of the minhagim and practices and halacha of the Vilna Gaon. And in fact, that's actually an interesting sefer to learn as well. You can see the inyanim, the unique psukim of the Gra and the makairis for them. Now, the Ma'aser Rav was compiled by a person who was called Rabbi Yisachar Ber, who was a dayan in Vilna, so he knew the Gra very, very well and saw the Gra all the time. Rav Chaim Volozhiner is sometimes chaylek on the Ma'aser Rav. He says he remembered it differently. So it's brought down in Paiskim that Rav Chaim Volozhiner is not the most reliable aid, meaning since he only saw the Gra biakrai, so he saw the Gra do something once, that's not a raya, for whatever reason, that's not a raya for the kviyas. And therefore the Rabbi Yisachar Ber, who was obviously a gadol, but he was not a gadol as great as Rav Chaim Volozhiner, but was considered to be a more reliable aidus on the Minhagei Agra than Rav Chaim Volozhiner. So to be a Talmud of the Gra was not like a full-time yeshiva. I mean, people had positions, people were abanim, and they would come. So the point is, the story they tell is that the Gra would only take a Talmud if he passed a certain test. He had to show that he had a geschmack in learning even what you might call the least interesting parts of Torah. So he would give them the first 9 prakim of Divrei Hayamim. Now, the first 9 prakim of Divrei Hayamim are literally just a list of names. The yichus of everybody all the way from Yaakov Avinu all the way to Ezra. And the Gra said you have to chazer it 100 times, and each time you should have more geschmack, more pleasure in it. He says if your cheshek increases every time you go over the names, that means you're roy to learn Torah, because every part of Torah gives you a cheshek, gives you a geschmack. If, on the other hand, you're going crazy, you're having to read the names 100 times, then it could be you're not on the madrega of having a geschmack in Torah. That's what they say. But the point that the Gra is making is that for most of us, we need a certain nekuda of Torah that's mechazik us. And once I have the chizuk, that transfers to everything. And so the Gra says, you got to find mashali b'chafetz, which is really Chazal say it, but the Gra's nekuda is that through mashali b'chafetz you will come to learn everything else as well. By the way, just as a little aside, there was a maskil. The Gra lived during the beginning of Haskalah, and a lot of the maskilim, some of them were not from, some were from, some were shomer mitzvahs, But they weren't into Gemara that much. They were into Tanakh. They were into Dikduk. So there was a maskil who really, really wanted to visit the Gra, to ask the Gra kashas on Nach and on Dikduk, which the Gra was also a Mumchen. But the Gra wouldn't see a maskil. So the person, he didn't have a beard, for example, so the person disguised as an Italian rabbi, because the Rabbanim in Italy didn't have beards. So he figured he'll dress up like an Italian Rav and say he's visiting from Italy. He wants to ask the Gra Shilas. So he dresses up as an Italian Rav. I'm not sure what he did with the accent or whatever it would be. And he comes to see the Gra. And the Gra apparently either knew the MS or was at least suspicious. So the Gra refused to let him come into the house. He didn't want this Avir to be in his house. So the Gra stood by the door and said, well, what do you want? So the person said, I have 100 questions I want to ask the Rebbe about to understand something. So the person, and these were complicated questions, so the person asks question number 1, and he's waiting for a teretz, and the Gra says, finish. Says, read me the whole 100 questions. So the guy reads 100 questions, and the Gra says, okay, the teretz to question 1 is really the same as the teretz to question 75. It's really the same yesod, and therefore, so really your 100 questions are really 6 different questions, which are, repeated in different ways. And he said, 1 is 75 and 2 is 37. And then he lumped together 10 different questions with a yesod. And the person was he was just flabbergasted. He was just amazed. This is like, they'd never seen anything like it. So then at the end, as he's leaving, the Gra says to him, I want to ask you a question. You're a Bucky and Dikduk and the like. He said, what's the shirish? One of the words for joy is ditza. Like we say, gila, rina, ditza. Ditza is joy. It says, what's the shirish of ditza? Apparently it didn't fit a normal shirish. So the person said to the Gra, says, the Balei Dikduk say that ditza does not mean singing, ditza means dancing. So the Gra said, now the Gra was really suspicious. He says, Chazal say ditza is simcha. I'm sorry, Chazal say ditza is simcha. He was saying ditza is dancing. He says, are you saying Keneged Chazal? He says, well, the Balei Dikduk say Chazal didn't have the right interpretation of it. So at that point, the Gra just turned away and said, this is Nigmar. So the guy goes to wherever he was, and like 15 minutes later, there's a knock on the door, and the Gabbai of Vilna says, are you the fellow that was just with the Gra? He says, yeah. He says, the Gra said, you were Malik al Divrei Chachamim, so you're chayiv to have an onesh. You're not allowed to just be mavazeh Chazal. So apparently they put him in a stockade, and they threw like tomatoes at him, and eggs at him, eggs, and then they tarred and feathered him, they threw him in the river. So this Moscow is describing this in a letter to a friend. He says, and they're Mavazmi, they kicked me, they threw me into the water, etc. And then he ends the letter and he says, but I would to see the Gra, I would do it again. He says, I would do it again. It was kedai to see such ga'inus. So to see the Gra was not a pashat azach, and they say to be a talmid of the Gra, you had to show you had a certain geschmack in learning, that even the things that look like they're not so interesting. Grata, the emes is, I don't know if any of you have learned Divrei Yamim. The truth is, there's quite a lot of interesting chazals because there are a lot of names that don't appear anywhere else. There are like different names for people that, like Moshe Rabbeinu has 7 names in Divrei Hayamim, but you wouldn't know it's Moshe Rabbeinu. So there's a lot of actually very, very interesting midrashim there, and the like. But although the Gra was not a public figure so much, but the emes is he was miyased many shiurim for Balabatim in Ein Yaakov, Chaye Adam, who was his mechutin, and the Gra always gave the first shir. So if the Gra got people to start a new shir in Ein Yaakov, he gave the first shir, so people would show up, and then he let the Magidei shir give it. So imagine you could be Zaycha, you could be a shoemaker in Vilna. And you got to hear like one shir from the Vilna Gaon, because he wanted to be machazek, the learning of Torah among Balabatim. Okay. So now let's go to Sif Beis. He's continuing, and I think we did begin to mention this. Mitchila tzarech lamale kreisei mikra. A person must fill his belly with mikra. That's Tanakh, Torah Nevi'im Ksuvim, and then Mishnah. Afal pi she'eino yodea lefarish hamasnis, and even though you don't know how to explain the Mishnah. Now again, remember the Gra Shita generally is like the Zilber. I mean, the Zilberman Shita today is the Shita Sagra. They're consciously following the Gra, and the Gra basically felt that even Bizman Azer we are mechuyev to follow Chazal's Hadracha. And that's really, that sounds like an obvious proposition, but obviously it's not so obvious because 99% of the Torah world doesn't follow the Chazal's Hadracha. But Chazal say, Ben Chomesh Lemikra, when you're 5, you start learning Chomesh, and Nach, Ben Eser Lemishnah, you don't even start Mishnah till you're 10, so 5 years only of Torah Shebichsav, and then 5 years of Mishnah, and only then do you then progress to what we call Talmud. Now, obviously, as I mentioned last week, Talmud in the Mishnah of Pirkei Avos does not mean Gemara. There was no Gemara when the Tanoim wrote the word Talmud in there. But Talmud means we would call Iyun, analytically learning Mishnah. So even before there was a written Gemara, there was Talmud, because that's what the Amoraim did, right? The Amoraim, or even the Tanoim, they would analyze Mishnayos. And the point that the Mishnah is making is, do not move to Iyun till you've mastered a knowledge base of the ideas of Torah, that you know Torah shebichsav solidly. And it's not just Chamisha Chumsei Torah. Mikra means all of the 24 books of Nach, all of them. And you know all of the Mishnayos. And only then do you progress to what we call the limud of Gemara. Practically, that would mean you wouldn't even start Gemara till the age of 15, which is obviously not the Meskeret of Chinuch today and the like. But the Gra's point is, I mean, again, based on Chazal, that without a solid Yediyah Satira, your pilpul is going to be a pilpul shel hevel. Now, the emes is, even someone like Rav Chaim of Brisk, who, when you think of Rav Chaim was the kind of creator of the yeshiva sha'iyun, of all of the Litvish yeshivas. Rav Chaim is mamish, the father of everything. Rav Chaim said, anyone that is mefalpel without knowing all of Shas is a pilpul shel hevel. It's a pilpul of nothingness. I mean, you're saying something that maybe the next element of Gemara, contradicts, and the like. How can you be mefalpel without yediyas? And the truth is, even in the yeshiva world of Europe, which we're not following Pirkei Avos, but the pshat is, when they were mefalpel, they still had a mastery of so many things. I mean, people commonly would say, if they were learning Yavamas, that's man. Yavamas is a hard masechta. So, a bacher would have learned, in this man, would have chazir the masechta 50 times. In their Ian Shir, they would have chazir the whole masechta 50 times. I mean, okay, that's not Me'ah V'yachas. The Gra holds even more Me'ah V'yachas. But still, 50 times. I mean, how many, can you imagine what it would be like, how well you would know a masechta if you chazir it 50 times? Amazing thing. So this is where, for some reason, we lack today. We lack this idea of Yediyah Satira. Again, there are two different mitzvahs. There's a mitzvah to learn. There's a mitzvah to spend your time learning. That's emes. V'hagisa bo yaimim v'layla. But there's also a mitzvah, the mitzvah v'shinantam levanecha. You shall teach your child. But Chazal darshan that v'shinantam is a lashon shinan, sharpening. That divrei Torah have to be mechudadim, sharp in your mouth. That someone asks you, you're able to give a definite answer to things. That's called Yediyah Satira. Yediyah Satira is a big chisaron. A person could learn for many, many years and not have a good Yediyah Satira. because it's not emphasized. We want to go immediately to this pilpul and that pilpul without just knowing the basic Yediyah Satira. So that's the side that underlies Ben Chomesh Lemikra, Ben Esher Lemishnah, that the Gra is if I could use as a chassid of. And by the way, earlier than the Gra, the Maharal of Prague, the Maharal wrote a Perush on Pirkei Avos, Derech Chaim, again, a very famous sefer on Pirkei Avos. And on the Ben Chomesh Lemikra, the Maharal digresses to decry the chinuch in his generation, where they jumpstart kids to advanced Gemara when they can't even read a pasuk in Chumash, Kitsurasai. And the Maharal goes on and on. Now the Maharal was much earlier. The Maharal was 200 years earlier than the Vilna Gaon. So already you see, number one, that the deviation from the chinuch of Chazal did already occur much earlier. And number two, that there were Gedolim that decried it. There were Gedolim that said it was not proper, just as the Gra is doing as well. Okay. Now, he does mention that there's a maila of learning Mishnah, even if you don't really understand it that well. So this reminds me, I remember I was once in a place for Shabbos, and there was an avrech from Lakewood who was teaching his 7-year-old some very difficult Mishnayos in Nagoyim or Ayolas, really like hard stuff. So I said to him, I asked him, Jay, how can you teach like a 5-year-old Nagoyim and Ayolas? So he said, the interesting thing, he said, to a 5-year-old, it's all the same. What I teach him Megillah, I teach him Nagoyim. He doesn't have to sense something being hard. Whatever you teach him, he picks up. So he says this concept that some things are hard and some things are easy, that's kind of something we get into when we're older. Oh, this is hard, But he said, I could teach a 5-year-old anything. As long as I know it, as long as I could teach a 5-year-old Nagoyim, I can teach a 5-year-old Megillah. It makes no nafkamina, so I might as well teach him hard things when he's young, and that way it's not going to be so scary for him. They say it by the Yerushalmi too. People often have a feeling that the Yerushalmi is like impossible, right? The Yerushalmi is just impossible. Okay, Bavli is hard enough, but Yerushalmi. So a great gadol who wrote a perush on the Yerushalmi actually said that the only reason we think the Yerushalmi is like so impossible is because since we're ragil in the Bavli and the Yerushalmi is a different style and a different Aramaic even, so we think it's impossible. If we would have started with the Yerushalmi, it wouldn't have been impossible. And he said, indeed, the Yerushalmi is easier than the Bavli. Actually said it's easier, but it's very, very unfamiliar. So to us, it's like a mountain that's impossible to climb. But if we would simply incorporate it as part of the Seder Halimud, he says it would not have been as difficult as people think. So there is a maila of, at least for a younger person, to learn Mishnayos even though he does not fully understand them, because things get clearer in time. Now, maybe you've experienced this yourself. I mean, there are times you're hearing a shir, you're learning something in Gemara. It doesn't click that well, but, by the time you've learned 10 more dafim, you say, oh yeah, now I get what that means there. See, sometimes people have the attitude, I can't move. I'm not going to move till I understand this klor. Sometimes that's not the mahalach. Sometimes you got to kind of say, okay, I don't really get this now. I'm going to go weiter and then see what happens. So the Steipler used to say, what is important though is, this is important, what is important is that you try to identify what it is that you don't know. There are two types of ignorance a person can have. I could be ignorant because just everything is a fog. It's just a fog. Or I could be ignorant because A does not fit with B. Now, there's enough gemina between fog ignorance and a particular kasha ignorance. A particular kasha ignorance, the eitzah is sometimes write it down, remember it, and go weiter. Because those things will tend to get clarified as you grow in Yediyah Satira. Fog ignorance, you got to stop and just ask yourself, what is it exactly that I don't understand here? You see the difference. It's okay to go weiter, and indeed you're mechuyev to go weiter, even if you don't have full understanding. but you need to try to identify what it is that you don't understand. Know what you don't know. If you don't know what you don't know, that's just confusion. And confusion don't go on until you're masader yourself in that way. That's actually very good. That's a very, very good insight. Stipler used to tell people that you should have a notebook and many, right? If you have unanswered kashas, write them down. Go weiter. Don't feel that I can't go on until I'm miyashiv my kashas. I mean, look at Rabbi Kiveger, the Gilyon Hashas. The Gilyon Hashas is from Rabbi Kiveger's Bekiya Seder. He used to learn 1,000 blot a day, they say. 1,000 blot a day. Of course, the Chazon Ish said, people think the greatness of Rabbi Kiveger is he learned 1,000 blot a day. Says the greatness of Rabbi Kiveger is he also learned one blot over 1,000 days. He was able to do both things, meaning his Ian was so extreme and so intense that he could take one blot and 1,000 days, but he also knew how to do 1,000 blots in one day. So the Gilyon Hashas are short things, right? Short things that he wrote in the Bekiya Seder. But he has a whole assortment of symbols. Tzorechiyun Gadol, Tzorechiyun Gadol Ma'od. There's all the hierarchy of like how strong is the kasha. Hashem Yoyer Einai, all sorts of things. And yet he goes weiter. He goes weiter, right? After he has Tzorechiyun Ma'od, there's another Gilyon Hashas, right? So Rabbi Kiveger went weiter. So they say that there was a person, a certain Talmud Chacham, who was so obsessed with a kasha that he could not go on. Yomim B'layla, he was thinking of this kasha. So I think he asks, I don't remember which gadol, maybe it was the Rogatchover, for a yishuv. And the Rogatchover said, Ayin Tosefta Nazir, certain daf. So the guy is so excited, he looks up Tosefta Nazir. The Tosefta Nazir has absolutely nothing to do with his kasha. He says he doesn't know, it has no shaykhus whatsoever. So he asks, tell me what's, how is this a yishuv to my kasha? So he says, okay, what does Tosefta say? Tosefta says, v'tema, a kasha. Right, tema means Tosefta doesn't give an answer. And what's the teretz Tosefta gives? He says, he doesn't give a teretz. And what comes right after that? A new Dibur HaMaschel. Says, that's the teretz to your kasha. Says, there got to be a new Dibur HaMaschel after a tema. He says, that's good for the teretz, right? So you can't get hung up a little bit. You can't say, I have to have a yishuv for every single thing. But you should at least know what it is you don't know. That talk is at least clarify in your head why. Because first of all, that'll be a big chizuk for you, because then you'll actually see, hopefully, that you know a lot more than you think. Sometimes a person is mavucha, so it's like, hey, this whole thing just doesn't make sense to me. But when you sort it out, you say, okay, I get Tosefta's kasha, and I get Tosefta's teretz, but I don't understand the second raya that he brings. So that's pretty good. You're walking away with quite a lot. You have a kasha, you have a teretz, you have a problem with the raya, as opposed to simply saying, this is all confusing to me. So it's a lot. It's a big chizuk for you, number one, to work out what it is you don't know. And number two, once you know what it is you don't know, you're attuned to kind of having yeshuvim as you go through your learning. That you'll see 10 blocks later, oh, now I get it, now I get it, now I see it, now I see the shaykhus, now I see the connection. This is what Chazal say, Divrei Torah niyim b'makam echad, v'yashim b'makam achar. They're poor in one place, they're right, they're Muslim in another place. Right. So the Gra says, fill up yourself with Mikra, with Mishnah, and then he goes on, he gives a very modest curriculum. Then you go to Gemara, Bavli, V'Yerushalmi, Tosefta, Mechilta, Sifra, Sifri. Okay, and the Gra says, okay, and eventually, what do you graduate to? You graduate to the Babylonian Talmud, that's Shas, and then the Talmud Yerushalmi, and then the Tosefta. Okay, not too many people learn Tosefta, B'chlal. I mean, Tosefta is in the back of every Gemara. What is Tosefta? Just stop. Tosefta is from the Tanaim. Tosefta, quite literally, means appendix or addition, and these were written by the Tanaim, or Rav Chia, Rav Aishia, as a hashlama to the Mishnah. And the truth of the matter is, Tosefta is one of the building blocks of a shakla v'tarya in the Gemara. When the Gemara quotes a brisa, Tanya or Tanu Rabbanan, right? These introduce brises. What does the word brisa mean? Brisa just means outside. Any teaching of Tanaim that is not in the Mishnah was called by the Amoraim a brisa. Brisa means outside of the Mishnah. Now, where do brisas come from? Right? There's no book, there's no sefer that's called the Book of Brisas. So brisas come from somewhere. And the Amoraim, Ravina and Ravashi, incorporated these brisas in the Shakla Vitaria of Kashas and Terutzim. So brisas can come from a lot of sources. Many brisas are from the Tosefta, and other brisas are from what are called the halachic midrashim, the Mechilta on Shemos, the Teiras Kayanim or the Sifra on Sefer Vayikra, and the Sifri is on Bamidbar and Devarim. So the Medrashay Halacha and the Tosefta are the primary makor for the brises that are brought in the Bavli and the Yerushalmi. Sometimes it tells you that on the sides from later. Later people put it in the Marmakim, and sometimes it doesn't. Now, in truth, there are brises that we don't know where they come from, meaning we've lost collections of brises that we don't have anymore. So that would be an undocumented brisa. We don't know where the brisa is. But many, many brises, probably most of the brises that are quoted in Shas, are either from the Tosefta or the Medrashay Halacha. Right? There's no Medrash Halacha on Breishis because there's not a lot of Halacha in Breishis, but Shmos is Mechilta, Sifra, Teres Kayanim on Vayikra, Sifri on Bamidbar Devarim. So the Gra says that part of your learning has to include not only Bavli Yerushalmi, but also the Tosefta, the Mechilta, the Sifra, which is Teres Kayanim, the Sifri on Bamidbar Devarim, V'chala Brises, and every collection of Brises you can get your hands on, even if it's not within those official collections. And then you have a knowledge base. Then you have a base of Yediyah Satira, and when you have Yediyah Satira, V'yachar kach lasek bepilpul chaverim. Then you go into Ian, trying to analyze questions, answers, stiras, and the like. So the Gra says before you do pilpul chaverim, there's so much that a person is supposed to try to know. V'zehu hadara shel Torah. This is the beauty of Torah. Torah becomes beautiful when your pilpulim are miyusad on these yedios in all of the rechavei hatalmud. Now the emes is, this was the derech of the Netziv in the Volozhiner Yeshiva. And this all comes from the Vilna Gaon, ultimately, because, once again, Rav Chaim Volozhiner was, of course, the Vilna Gaon's Talmid Muvak. Rav Chaim Volozhiner was Miyased, the Volozhiner Yeshiva, right, the Yeshiva of Volozhin. When Rav Chaim died, the Rosh Yeshiva was his son, Rav Yitzchak of Volozhin, Rav Yitzchak mi Volozhin he was called. The Netziv was the son-in-law of Rav Yitzchak of Volozhin. So Rav Netziv married the granddaughter of Rav Chaim Volozhiner, and the Netziv's whole derech, the Netziv was Rosh Yeshiva for 50 years, so the Netziv was the longest Rosh Yeshiva of Volozhin, and the Netziv was miyased very much, his derech of limud, on, we would call it today almost a Bikiyas, but it wasn't like a superficial, it was a Bikiyas of Yerushalmi, Tosefta, Midrashim, all of these different Makairis, and when he would give a share, he would give a share based on this. You can see this. We have the Chidushim of the Netziv on Masechtas. These are the Svarim called Meraymei Sada. But in addition, the Netziv wrote Perushim on the Mechilta, on the Sifri, on the Shiltas, meaning on early collections. He didn't write on the Tosefta, but he indirectly explains many Toseftas. This was the Shita of the Gra. And this is called Hadara Shel Torah. And therefore he says, Aval, HaMeshane Seder Halimut. If you deviate from this Seder, Shalomei Techila Leida Eich Lefalpo. The first thing you want to learn, you're in high school, you're in 9th grade, and you want to fetch around with Kashas and Terutzim and Lamdas to be like the big boys. Ve'ena Yadeya Mishnah Achas Kitsurasa. And a person might not even know a single Mishnah properly. So what does it say? Ya'abed Gam miksa satirish sheshama ben arusa. Not only will he not advance in his learning, but even the little bit of Torah he learned when he was younger, he's going to forget, because he'll be so meshukah in pilpulim and the like. So, again, I mean, the obvious problem that you have is that there seems to be a real disconnect in many ways. Okay, so we have this, and then we have what we do, and we bedafka are oisek in pilpulim, we're oisek in all sorts of chakiras, and the like. So what is it? Is everybody doing everything wrong? So again, you're learning the Eben Shelaima, the Gra would say, yeah, you're doing everything wrong. But as I say, in defense, sometimes the idea is that we're not always, well, I'll give two truths. One will be a teretz for the yeshiva world generally, and the second will be a teretz, let's say, for Or Sameach Befrat. But let's talk about the yeshiva world generally. And that is, because of the Yeridas Hadeiros, people don't always have a geschmack in simple Yediyas HaTorah. Most people are not going to be able to read the list of names in Divrei Hayamim 100 times with a lot of passion and excitement. So as a result, the same way if somebody is sick, let's say somebody is ill and they need to eat, but they don't have an appetite. So sometimes you got to give them something very sweet or very spicy, because that excites the appetite a little bit. And they're not going to eat something bland and without taste, even though they need to eat. So sometimes we have to add spice and pepper to basic learning to give people a geschmack, a high, an intellectual challenge. So in a sense, the pilpul is kind of a way of spicing. In fact, the word pilpul means from pepper. Pepper, that's exactly right. That's why it's called. It's pepper. It's to pepper the learning. Now the problem is, at some point, the pepper becomes, right, pepper is great. To add a little pepper to the soup is good, but you're not supposed to add a little soup to the pepper. If you had a bowl of pepper, that wouldn't be good for you. So the problem sometimes is that we have the tafel becoming more ikr than the ikr, and then you have a problem. But the overall idea is that we need a certain pilpul, even at a younger age, because that stimulates the geschmack and the cheshek and the passion, and hopefully it'll lead to a greater yediyah satira. Again, it often doesn't, but that's the justification. Now, when you talk about a yeshiva like Or Sameach, in other words, a yeshiva where sometimes many talmidim don't even begin learning till a later age. So there you have a different cheshbon, and that is, as I said last week, I think, if a bacher were to tell me, I'm ready to sit and learn Torah for 20 years, I'm going to give the yeshiva or some yeshiva 20 years. So then I would talk and say, first 5 years, we're just going to learn Chumash. Next 5 years, we're going to learn Mishnah, and then we'll spend 10 years learning Shas. And you'll leave yeshiva, you'll know Shas. But the problem is, most people are not going to say, I'm going to learn for 20 years. I'm going to learn for 1 year. So what do you do for that 1 year? You have 1 year to give them a skill that if they don't get in a full-time maskeret, it's going to be very hard to get later. So we have to front-load pilpulim and things like that, because these are going to be kochos that they're not going to really be able to develop later, because they're not going to be in a full-time environment. All right, so it's a get of Harav Shah. In other words, we have to do things not in the right order because we don't have enough time to do them in the right order. It's a get of Harav Shah. Because theoretically I could tell a person, Chumash and Mishnah you can learn later on your own. Okay? Gemara and Iyun is very difficult to learn on your own later. So what do? We reverse the order. And the Gra warns us that that's not a great thing to do. But sometimes you got to do the lesser evil, because if the pshat is the guy will never develop this because he's not going to be in yeshiva long enough, so you got to jump the gun. You got to cut corners. So we have to recognize that this is not the optimal way of doing it, but nevertheless, sometimes it's necessary. But the optimal way, so if a person here's the thing. So at some point, you've learned the lumdus, you've learned the pilpul. What is the derech of your learning in your life? Like, what is your life going to be, right? Your life. So at some point, you got to go to this. You do have to go to this. People say, oh, in yeshiva you learn how to learn. Okay, it's wonderful to learn how to learn, but when do you learn? Meaning, even that expression has a mashmos. You're not really learning, you're learning how to learn. Okay, Baruch Hashem, learn how to learn. But then I have to learn, right? So the Gemara is telling us what is learning. Bavli, Yerushalmi, Tosefta, right? All of these different inyanim. Now, I will tell you this. In the Ma'aser Rav, I don't think he said, I don't remember it yet, but we'll look ahead. I don't think he says it here. It's interesting. But in the Ma'aser Rav, it's brought down that he had a very interesting approach to learning for people who don't have all the time, right? A person doesn't always have so many hours to learn all of these inyanim. And he encouraged a minhag that is not widely followed today, but it used to be much more widely followed. And that is, people would use the Riff as a way of mastering Shas. What is the Riff? The Riff is Rav Yitzchak Alfasi, Gedolei HaRishonim, and the Riff is printed in the back of every Gemara. And what did the Riff do? The Riff, essentially he wrote he summarized Shas. So, for example, 5 blot of Gemara could be 1 blot in the Riff. So you're learning the basic shitas, machlokas tanoim, amoraim, without all of the kashas and terutzim, and you're doing it al seder hashas. So the Gra said a person should be mishtadel to learn 3 blot of Riff a day, which is not so onerous because a blot of Riff is usually shorter than a blot of Gemara, and to chazer it over and over and over again. 3 blot of Riff with Rashi. Now, just a little comment. There is Rashi on the Riff, but you have to know Rashi did not write on the Riff. Although the Riff was a little before Rashi, but Rashi did not write a commentary on the Riff. Rashi wrote on the Gemara. But since the Riff is a kitzer, so at some point the famous printers, took the Rashi from the side of the Gemara and they put it on the Riff. Now that's in addition to the big Perushim which are directly on the Riff, such as the Ran or Nemuka Yosef. But that is only a person who has time for Ian. But the Gra talked about his Bekiah Seder for people was 3 blot of Riff and Rashi that you chazer many times. And he says, and over time you will essentially know Shas. You will know the Iker Yedias of Shas. Now, the problem is that the Riff is not on all of Shas. The Riff did not write on Kodshim, on Tyrus, or Zerayim. The Riff only wrote on Mayed, Nashim, and the Zikin. It's interesting, the Chavetz Chaim, much like Chavetz Chaim, actually did a Riff on Kodshim. It's called the Kutei Halachas. The Chavetz Chaim did the equivalent of a Riff on Zvachim and Nachas B'chayres, and he was also Malakiat Rashi and Taisus and the like. So the Chavetz Chaim has given us the equivalent of a Riff on Seder Kodshim as well. And the Gra held that was a big eitzah. Now the emes is, the Gra was not mechadish this. This was a minhag for hundreds of years, that people were learning Riff, but it somehow it fell out of popular use. Although I see now that some people are trying to bring it back in different ways. But it is an eitzah. You might find, if you want to chazer a masechta and know the basic ideas, chazering it through the Riff might be a very good eitzah. In fact, the old minhag in Europe was that the Elul and Wintersman, let's say from Sukkot to Pesach, they would learn the masechta, and Pesach to Ben Azmanim, they would chazer it with the Riff many times. So the Riff was actually the limud of the Pesach Zman. So the Gra does not say it here, but he mentions it in the Ma'aser Rav. They bring such a thing of 3 blot of Riff a day. Again, 3 blot of Riff is like learning 15 blot of Gemara, more or less. But the basic ideas of the sugya. Okay, all right. So now we're up to Sif Gimel. Halomed Kitzer Dinim Sof sheyishkach hakol. Okay, this is taken from the Grand Mishlei, and here is the thing. Baruch Hashem, today, much more so than the time of the Gra, we have all sorts of books that give you the immediate maskanas, right? You can learn a book of Hilchos Shabbos and a book of Hilchos Kashrus and a book of Halachos, which are not connecting you to the Gemara, it's just giving you the bottom line. And one could have a Yetzer Hara in some ways and say, listen, if the goal of everything is that I should know things, so why do I have to go through Kashas and Teretz? I'll just learn the bottom lines. Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, Art Scroll, whatever it is. So the Gra says there are no shortcuts. If your Torah knowledge is based on summaries of final halachos, it's not going to stick with it. And now again, he's not addressing the fact that these Sfarim do serve an important need. Listen, if I want to, I remember a Maisa many years ago. I was in a Sfarim store, and a person came into the Sfarim store, and he asked the owner. He was looking for the Art Scroll on Maseches Eruvin, which is a 2-volume thing. Art Scroll on Eruvin. So the owner said, the person didn't even look that for him. So the owner said to him, it's right over here, but I'm just saying Eruvin is such a hard Masechta. Do you really want to learn the most difficult Masechta in Shas? Like, why are you doing Eruvin? So the person said, well, yeah, I'm getting a Maseches Eruvin because I live in a city that doesn't have an Erev, so I figure that this will show me how to make an Erev in my backyard. Well, this is a bit of a subtle joke, but it actually is very funny. If you wanted to know how I should build an Erev, to take a Maseches Eruvin is literally the last book you're going to look at. I open it up, I have, machlokas about this and that, and machlokas Rashi and Tosefta and Rambam and Rashi. I'm going to have shita after shita and questions and answers. It doesn't tell me how to make an Erev. So good. So if I'm a Talmud Chacham, I'm a posek, so through the sugya, I come to maskanas. But Stam, open up a Gemara, and that's going to tell you what to do? Dafka's not going to tell you what to do. It's going to give you a million opinions on everything. So there is room in the world for Kitzurei Dinim. We need books that tell you exactly what to do. In fact, I often tell people ask me, when they have a halacha seder, what should they learn? Should they learn Mishnah Berurah and this and that? So I say, it all depends. If you want to learn, if you're learning halacha seder because you want to learn how to learn halacha, then Ein Achinami. Do the Mishnah Berurah, do the Bir Halacha, do the Dirshu with the Ha'aras. The Bir Halacha is a tremendous sefer of Lamdas even. But if you're learning halacha because you want to know what to do practically, Mishnah Berurah is Lav Dafka the best book. For Keret. Mishnah Berurah also gives you different shitas, number one. And number two, the Mishnah Berurah does not address what you might call contemporary issues. The Mishnah Berurah, for example, has nothing about electricity. Right? If I want to know something about adjusting a refrigerator on Shabbos or whatever it would be, I'm not going to find it beferish in the Mishnah Berurah. So I said, if you're learning halacha to practically know what to do, then get an Art Scroll book and learn it from there. So it all depends. If I'm learning halacha because I want to know how we understand halacha, how we get from here to there, how I get from a sugya to a maskana, then you take a sefer like the Mishnah Berurah and you try to trace it. But sometimes you have to learn halacha just because I have to have an answer. So there I should use English book, whether English or Hebrew, whatever it is. But I need kitzurim. So there is a utility for what the Gra calls kitzurei dinim. But the Gra is making a point. That's if you need a particular answer. But you're not going to have a yediyas hatayra through those kitzurim. The yediyas hatayra has to come through understanding a sugya, through learning a sugya, through seeing the different rishonim, achronim, and then it'll be in your mind because you'll see it as part of a hemshech. In fact, that gufa was the maila of the Riff. The reason why the Gra encouraged the Riff, let's say, more than the Rambam. Why didn't the Gra say, learn, like Chabad said, learn a page of Rambam every day? Because you see, even though the Riff is a kitzer, But the Riff does give you the a Shakla V'Tarya aspect of it, kasha and answer. And the Gra held that instead of just learning maskanos, see, maskanos don't stay in your head. This rule, that rule, that rule, that rule, that rule, that rule. But when you see a kasha, a teretz, and this is why we say it, you remember it more because it's connected to a whole framework. That's why the Gra was more enthusiastic as a limud kavua of the Riff more than the Rambam or the Shulchan Aruch, because Shulchan Aruch, they give you maskanas, but they don't give you the way that they came. Through the Riff, even though a lot of the Shakla V'Tarya is missing, but the Riff can give you a chush, the Riff can give you a connection to the notion of the Shakla V'Tarya. Now, of course, it's interesting, the Graz Mechutin wrote a very famous sefer of Kitzurei Dinim, that's the Chayei Adam. So it's a little bit of a shtach to his own Mechutin. I don't remember which way they were, but their children married each other. I don't remember if it's the Graz daughter and Chayei Adam's son or vice versa. But this is Rav Avram Danzig, who was in Vilna, and Rav Avram Danzig was a businessman. But you see what a Vilna businessman was, and he was an enormous Talmid Chacham, and he wrote a few Sfarim, all of which are considered to be halachic classics. The Chayei Adam was the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch of Lita. The Kitzur Shulchan Aruch of Rav Shlomo Ganzrig was Hungary, but the Chayei Adam was the Litvisha Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, and he wrote the Chachmas Adam on Yoredeya, and he wrote a Sefer on Hilchos Shabbos called Zichru Teiras Maisha. All of these Sfarim are brought down by the Paiskim, but they would certainly fall under the category of Kitzurei Dinim, and the Gra says one who is doing his limud from Kitzurei Dinim is going to forget his Torah. It's not going to remain in his head. And that's why people always, a very common statement is, I don't remember halacha. I don't remember halacha. Because what are you going to remember? You learn 100 rules. It's hard to remember 100 rules. But when you have the lumdus of it, so you only need to know 5 things. In other words, from the basic yisodos, I can then build a lot of the present because I see their logical foundations. As opposed to learning halachos separately, you don't see the connections between them. And that's why it's easier to remember 5 things from which you can extrapolate 100 things. In fact, Rav Elyashiv, for many years, was a dayan in the Rabbanut. Some people tried to deny it, but this was certainly a fact. And even after he retired from the Rabbanut, he would often be the one who would recommend people to be dayanim. So anyone who wanted to be a dayan in a beis din of the Rabbanut would have to, Rav Elyashiv would test him and see if he was right. And Rav Elyashiv would often say that there were 2 types of candidates that came to him. Both of them were mitzuyanim. There was one type of candidate who knew every sif katan in Choshen Mishpat. He knew every sma, every shach, everything exactly, but didn't really go back to the Gemara and the Rishonim. He just knew everything in the Shulchan Aruch. There were other people who, they didn't know everything in the Shulchan Aruch, but they had gone through the sugyas with Tosefta and Ramban and Ran, Rishonim. Rav Elyashiv held that the better dayanim were the second category. Because the first category memorized everything in the Shulchan Aruch. So if a case came up exactly like the Shulchan Aruch talks about, they would know exactly what the answer is. But you're not always so lucky, meaning usually the shilas that come up are not exactly the same as the Shulchan Aruch. You got to use the Yesaides to be able to apply it. And Rav Elyashiv said that requires a havana of a sugya. And he said, if a person had a real deep havana of sugyas, even if he didn't know what the Shulchan Aruch said lamaskana, he would know where to look. It's like, the sugyas, the shilas, the issues. Elamai, I don't remember which way do we come out, so I'll look it up. And again, Rav Elyashiv didn't have to look it up, he knew that too. But what he's saying is, it's not so critical. We have, in other words, if I really know the subject, I just don't remember, do I go like A, do I go like B, so that I can look up. But a person who didn't put in the amelis to understand the sugya, they're going to be in the dark. They're not going to know how to apply the halachas. Rabbi Yashiv said, I would prefer a dayan who knew the sugyas well, even if he didn't know the maskana of the paiskim, to someone who knew the maskanas but didn't have a firm yesod in the sugya. And that's why he was not a big chassid. You know, it's very popular in Eretz Yisrael now. We have halacha kailulim. There are Mishnah Berurah kailulim, different kailulim, which emphasize halacha l'maisa. So on one hand, that's very good. Halacha l'maisa, that's a wonderful thing. Whether it's Orach Chaim, Mishnah Berurah kailul, or whether it's Choshen Mishpat even. No, these are important things. But Rabbi Yashiv pointed out that a lot of times these kailulim are so fixated on bottom line stuff that they don't want to go through the sugyas. Like, why should I go through, the Ran here? I mean, let me just look at the Mishnah Berurah and see what the Mishnah Berurah is paskins. He says, that's a mistake. That's exactly what the Gemara is talking about. That's cutting the corners of not going through the sugyas. And even when people read shuvas, they just want to read the maskana. Igros Moshe. Now, Rav Moshe's shuvas are filled with lumdas, very complicated lumdas, very difficult lumdas. But, it's too hard. They're long and they're hard. And, I mean, some are short, but a lot of them are. So what people do is they say, interesting shaila, are you allowed to play chess on Shabbos or something? And Rav Moshe will write 20 pages on it. They'll just look at the last paragraph. L'chein mutter, l'chein aser. I want the shaila, and I want the answer. I can skip the stuff. I can skip the stuff in the middle. The stuff in the middle is too hard. Yeah, and that's why Rav Moshe was himself was mistake. Somebody proposed, although they've done it later in years, but in his lifetime they proposed, listen, could we make a kitzer of the Igros Moshe where we give the shailas and we give the answers so people could see? Shaila, mutter, shaila, aser. Rav Moshe was against it. He says he did not allow his tshuvas to be summarized without the lumdus. He said because without the lumdus, people aren't going to know how to apply them. Maybe they'll know that exact thing, but you need the lumdus. A Rav needs the lumdus. Without the lumdus, how do you know how to apply it to anything? So that's what the Gra is saying here, that when you only have Kitsuri Dinim, you don't have anything, because you don't really understand what is going on. Okay, let's read one more. Adalit, Hechacham Nana V'yesh Limudai B'ma Shemakayim Mitzvahs Bayrei Av Shadayim Lo Yada. So this kind of goes back to the Divrei Hayamim. A Chacham gets pleasure in his learning because he's serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu, even when he is in the state of not understanding what he's learning. Yeah, when I'm frustrated, I don't understand, but I get a pleasure in learning because learning is learning. Learning is serving Hashem. And therefore, he sees the chashivas of Torah even in his ignorance. And therefore, choser tamid, he will chazer it again and again, and he will find tam, he'll find taste in it, meaning in it. Aval haksil, a foolish person, eino nana achi yisayim ha-sefer. Right? The ksil always wants to finish. I want to make a siyum. So he's not happy in the process of learning. He's happy only when he achieves a final goal. As a result, he's going to rush, and he's not going to see a siman bracha. What do they say? They say b'shem Rav Yisrael Salanter. He talks about niskatnu adeiros. He says every person wants to know Shas, and Baruch Hashem, that's an attainable goal. Every person can know Shas. Baruch Hashem. Then he says, but people are so impatient, they want to know Shas in one night. He says, that's a little hard. Maybe only the Vilna Gaon could do Shas in one night. But then he says, but people are even worse. They want to know Shas in one night, and they want to have 8 hours of sleep the same night. He says he doesn't even know. That he's not sure that even the Gra could do. Of course, the Gra never slept 8 hours, but theoretically. He says, but that's what we want. We want the final result. I want to finish Masechta. I want to be a Baki B'Shas. I want to be a Talmid Chacham. I want to be a Rosh Yeshiva. But we don't get a geschmack in the process of becoming that. And the Gra says the Talmud Chacham is not just looking at the end product. Talmud Chacham understands that this minute, this hour, that I'm trying to understand something, is Olam Haba. This is Me'ein Olam Haba, greater than Olam Haba. And that's what he says. The Chacham sees a Tayelas in the Amelis of the moment. The Kasil sees the Tayelas only in the long-term achievement. And paradoxically, because he doesn't see a Tayelas in the process, he will not see a bracha in that final achievement either. Okay, we'll stop here.